Hey Nate, this is lesson 14. We're going to be talking today about two different things. We're going to be talking about climate, and we're also going to be talking about different kinds of vegetation, different categories of vegetation. But we're going to start with climate, and remember, last week we were talking about climate and weather, and the difference between the two. Weather is something that we can talk about today because we had some strange weather this past week, snow in October, which is rather unusual, not unprecedented, but certainly unusual. Weather is the kind of conditions that we might be exhibiting from within a short period of time, from season to season, month to month. Sometimes in New England, it's minute to minute, it seems. Climate is different. Climate is a typical weather pattern that a particular region experiences over a long period of time, and remains generally the same, as opposed to weather that can change from day to day. There are five categories of world climate, and climate has a great influence on the people that live within that particular climate and how they live. And so that's why we're interested in climate, because when we start looking at different parts of the world, climate will be one of the things that we will be describing. That's how we will describe that particular region. So the first of the five climates is the what we would call tropical rainy climate. Tropical rainy climate. That would be what we would find in the Amazon forests of South America. Rainfall is extremely heavy. They receive about 10 inches of rain a month. And with 10 inches of rain a month, you can pretty much count on it. Probably rains just about every day. A day where it doesn't rain would be unusual. And the tropical rainy forests are heavily treed because trees are the vegetation that requires the most amount of water. Kind of makes sense. They're the largest, so they require the largest amount of water. And so the rain forests, are found in this tropical rainy climate. The second climate would be dry climate, which obviously is the complete opposite, just about, of the tropical rainy climate, which would include dry climate, would include deserts. Rainfall is less than 10 inches for the whole year, where the rainforests receive at least 10 inches a month. We're talking about dry climate that receives less than 10 inches in a whole year's time. Interesting, deserts are caused by the lack of water, not by the hot temperatures. We sometimes think, well, it's a desert because it's so hot. No, it's a desert because it doesn't get any rain. That's why it is a desert. There are two words we're going to look at while we're talking about dry climate. One is arid and one is semi-arid. Arid is the term that would be used for most deserts, receive very, very little rain or any kind of moisture. That's what the word arid means, lacking moisture. Semi-arid means there's a little bit more rain, and so the ground will support grasses, not trees. There's not enough water for trees to grow, but there is enough water for grasses to grow. The middle section of the United States, between the Appalachian Mountains on the east and the Rocky Mountains on the west, is called the Great Plains of the United States. And the Great Plains enjoys a semi-arid climate. Very few trees and grasses grow there, which is why it is utilized for growing our wheat and corn and barley and a lot of other grains, which are in essence grasses. Deserts can form at any latitude. As a matter of fact, the interior regions of Greenland, and what do we know about Greenland? It's mostly what? Ice. But the middle part of Greenland is actually a desert. And it's a desert because it lacks water. Not because it's hot, but because it lacks water. So interior Greenland is technically a desert, even though it is covered with ice. So we have the tropical rainy climate and the dry climate, and now we're going to talk about the cold climate. The cold climate might have sufficient rainfall, but it has low temperatures. So it can't support many kinds of plants because of the temperature situation, not because it doesn't receive a lot of rain. Antarctica and Greenland have a thick layer of ice that never melts, so it is always cold. And the even though it may receive rain and precipitation, the temperature too cold to support very much vegetation. The polar regions are cold year round, not much vegetation on the pole areas. But the subpolar regions very often do support evergreen forests, evergreen trees, because there's enough moisture there and the temperatures are not too cold for them to survive. And then the fourth climate is called the moderate climate. That would be the climate that is found between the Tropic of Cancer in the north and the Tropic of Capricorn in the south. Moderate rainfall, moderate temperatures. That's where most of the human civilizations and farmland are located, in this fourth climate, the moderate climate. Just enough rain and temperatures neither too hot nor too cold. Rainfall not too much and just enough, not too little. That is the moderate climate. There are some different moderate climates that are located within that moderate climate. They are called zones. Even in the United States, we are divided up into zones. And I'll see if I can find a map that shows us the gardening zones. Some plants that are grown as native flowers. For example, poinsettias. Poinsettias that we bring into our home at Christmas time. They grow naturally outside in Florida. They would never grow naturally outside in Connecticut. A lot of our house plants that we grow here, philodendron and just a lot of our house plants that we grow as house plants here in New England grow naturally in the southern parts of the United States outside. That's where they come from. That's where we get them from. And we bring them up north and grow them inside because they will not survive in our lower temperatures and our lower rainfall than what they get in the south. And the last of the climates is called varied highland. And we talked about this before, that even on a single mountain, there may be a variety of different climates. At the base of a mountain, we may have hardwood trees growing, but in the middle of that mountain, halfway up that mountain, the trees start getting thinner and thinner, and maybe we only have evergreen trees growing there, that the hardwoods would not survive because of the shape of their leaves. And yet when we get to the summit, we might even be on the tundra, which doesn't grow any kind of vegetation like that. It only will support mosses. So we do know that that a highland area can have a variety of different climates that support different kind of vegetation, and also different kind of animals would live because that's the only place they could survive, at the base, the middle, or the summit of a mountain. Varied highland. So we have tropical rainy climate, we have a dry climate, we have cold climate, moderate climate, and varied highlands. Those are the 5 major categories of world climates. And every place on Earth would fit into one of those categories of climates. While I'm talking about varied highland, Mount McKinley in Alaska, in Denali National Park, is the highest mountain in North America at 29,000 feet. Very high mountain. And it has a varied highland climate, as you would expect. As a matter of fact, the climate on the south face of that mountain varies very much from the climate on the north face. Varied vegetation from the north to the south. Different animals living on the south face of that mountain as compared to the north face of the mountain. Not only is it affected by the temperatures and the amount of rainfall, but it's affected by the winds that come off of the Sea of Alaska, which affect the southern part of that mountain. An interesting fact is that in 2015, President Obama changed the name, potential spam. President Obama changed the name of Mount McKinley, the mountain, to Denali. So Mount McKinley is now known as Denali. Denali being the name of the people that were native Alaskans that originally lived in that region that is our state of Alaska. So Mount McKinley is no longer Mount McKinley. Now it is Denali. Just a little piece of information for you there. Now we're going to talk about vegetation. And vegetation just refers to the type of plants that grow in a particular region. Based on the climate, obviously, we kind of already established that due to the temperatures and the amount of rainfall, a certain vegetation is ideal for a particular climate. Vegetation is similar in similar climates. So if we have a vegetation that grows well in the Mediterranean climate or the semi-tropic climate, then wherever we find that kind of climate, the same kind of vegetation will grow. But there are certain things that might change that. It would be the condition of the soil, the kind of soil, the condition of the soil, and maybe mountains and rivers that might come into play when we're trying to determine what kind of vegetation will grow in a certain climate that's equivalent to another climate. Did I confuse that? If so, I will try to explain it offline. Animals found in a region may vary depending on what kind of vegetation is found. For example, Australia. Australia has many different kinds of vegetation that we don't see any place else in the world. It also has animals that we don't see any other place in the world. Kangaroos and most marsupials are limited to Australia. Koala bears feed on eucalyptus leaves, and eucalyptus trees are by and large only grown in or only survive in the outback of Australia. So animals are also restricted by vegetation and where it is found. I'm going to talk about biome for a minute. B-I-O-M-E. Biome is the term that is used to describe a large region where certain plants and animals are found living together. So that place in Australia where eucalyptus trees are grown and therefore koala bears survive and live there, that's called a biome. And there are 3 distinct biomes: forests, grasslands, and wastelands. And again, underneath each of those major biomes, there would be sub-biomes, subcategories. But by and large, a biome is either a forest, a grassland, or a wasteland. Let's talk about forests, first of all. And as you can imagine, there are a number of different kinds of forests. The first, a forest would just be a place where trees are predominant. It's usually found in rainy climates. The tropical rainforest, obviously, is a forest that's found where they get a lot of rain. Not dependent on the temperatures, totally dependent on the amount of rain. But they are usually found in the tropics and contain many different kinds of trees and many kinds of animals that depend on what those trees supply. The trees in a tropical rainforest are huge. The branches and leaves spread out and they form a large canopy. A canopy would just be like the umbrella part of a forest. It can be 100 feet above the forest floor, where we would find the roots of the trees. The soil on the forest floor is very thin because it is protected by the tree cover, by the canopy. So there's not a lot of wind that's blowing in new soil to add to the soil on the forest floor. So it is relatively thin. When forests are cut down to provide more land for farmland, they really do come against a big problem, because the soil of the forest floor is very thin, not very deep, very limited to the kinds of vegetation that can be grown there, because there's just so far down that those roots can go to get the nutrients and the water that they need. So forests are good for logging, but they're not good for farming. And teak and mahogany and ebony, certain kinds of cherry trees or oak trees are found only in the tropical rainforests, and they are harvested and converted into logs for building. There also is a forest called that we would refer to as woodlands, the woods. That our woods are not really forests; they're woods. They have a lot of trees in them. They're actually technically called shrub forests. They don't get as much rain as the tropical rainforests. The summers are shorter. Our summers are shorter than certainly we find in the tropical rainforests. And we find a lot of short trees, saplings, thin trees, shrubs, dense bushes in our woods. So we have forests and then we have woods. And you see the difference between the two. And then we have what we would call coniferous forests or evergreen forests. These trees produce their seeds in a cone. There are a lot of different deciduous kinds of, coniferous trees that produce their seeds in cones. And these trees primarily grow in subpolar regions where it is cold. We don't see very many coniferous forests in around the tropics. No, we see them in the much colder areas, with the exception of the giant redwoods in Florida. The giant redwoods are in California, Northern California, and there are pine forests in Florida. Those would be two exceptions to the rule that the evergreens grow in harsher subpolar polar regions where other broadleaf trees cannot survive. Um, the those trees, the coniferous trees, have needles, and they don't lose them. Not the way our trees here lose them. They don't lose their needles as much um, completely, and they stay green all winter long. The wood from the coniferous forest is used for paper production and furniture, by and large, not good for heating, which you probably know that when Daddy's looking for trees to salvage off the side of the road, he would much rather have an oak or a maple rather than a spruce or a pine or a fir, which would be examples of the kind of trees that we're talking about here. If you have like an outdoor furnace where the heat gets really, 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 really hot, then it is you're more apt to kind of use the coniferous, the trees, if that's all you can get. But the preference would, in that case, would still be for the hardwood trees. So that's the evergreen forests. And then we have the deciduous forests. Those trees would be like our maple and oaks and wild cherry, the trees that we would mostly see here in New England. Those trees have broad, flat leaves. They require a great deal of water as compared to the coniferous trees, and they need a growing season of at least 4 months, which we would have here certainly, but the spring and the summer and into the fall, we would have 4 months where those trees could grow, and then they stop growing and they lose their leaves. Um, the growing season, when we use the term growing season, it's the time between the last killing frost of spring and the first killing frost of fall. We have already had frost that has killed some of our plants. I'm not sure that we've actually had a killing frost. I usually consider when my hosta turn yellow and shrivel up, and my hydrangea and back are just all limp and have obviously are dead. They're no longer growing. That's a sign that we've had our first killing frost. And actually, I'll have to go out and look today and see whether that snow resulted in a killing frost. We had 24 degrees today, so I suspect that that's exactly what I'm going to find. Examples again of those deciduous trees would be maples, elms, if you can find them, wild cherry, beech, birch, oak. They are also used for paper making, but are also used for furniture and for heating. Very often we'll see the wood from the coniferous, the pine and the spruce. Those are used for construction. Very often the framework of homes is cut from those kind of trees. So that has to do with forests. That was everything that I was just talking about is the first biome, which is forests. Now the second biome is called grasslands. And that's land that lacks enough water to support forests, but has a prolonged dry season. Grasses grow quickly. They produce seeds quickly. They reseed themselves quickly before the dry season starts. So tropical grasslands, which would be grasslands in what kind of temperatures? Warmer temperatures. They're also called savannas. Savannas we find in Africa. I'm sure that you have. Well, actually, if you've watched any of the Ice Age movies, you've seen the animals crossing the savannas, the Serengeti. They are Savannas or tropical grasslands are sort of like parks, natural parks. Lots of grass and not a lot of trees. Isn't that what our parks look like? Lots of grass and few trees. Grasses can grow in savannas, they can grow 10 feet high. And because they can grow that high and they are found in tropical hot temperature climates, they are very susceptible to fire. So there are a lot of fires in the savanna. Animals that graze in these tropical grasslands would be elephants, giraffes, lions, and wildebeests. So if I tell you that savannas support elephants, giraffes, lions, and wildebeests, would you expect to find savannas in the United States? No, no, because the United States basically is not a tropical grassland. Yes, we have grasslands, but they are not tropical. We have what's called a temperate grasslands, and that is also um, another name would be prairies. That's what we would call them in the United States, the prairie land. Again, if we want to go back to a TV program or TV series, that would be what you would see if you watched Little House on the Prairie. For some reason, I was thinking Walton's, and that wasn't it. That was Mountain Living. Little House on the Prairie. That would be the prairie, also called steppes, Steppes, is where the prairies, what prairies are called in other parts of the world. But they all are temperate grasslands. Good soil. The ground is hard, and it's hard to plow up. It needs some pretty heavy duty machinery to break it up so that it can be planted. But the soil is good. The crops need to be irrigated because there's not really enough rainfall to support them. And as I said, our prairies in the Midwest are an example of the moderate, temperate grasslands. And then the third, what have we done so far? Forests and grasslands, yes. The third one is called wastelands. Barren most of the year because they receive very little rainfall. Actually, special survival skills are necessary in order to live in these lands that are referred to as wastelands. Some of them might consist of deserts. Not easy to live in the desert. I'm always amazed at the Bedouins that are desert dwellers in the Middle East and in Israel. Even we saw a number of different Bedouins that were traveling through the deserts. Always amazed me that since water is a necessity of life, that the Bedouins were able to find water in the deserts. But they do. They know where to find them and how to access that water. They have the survival skills necessary to live in that wasteland called a desert. Precipitation is very minimal in the deserts. Plants that grow there would be cacti and other succulent plants that store water in their stems and in their leaves. So it's very limited in the amount of or the kinds of plants that can survive there. And because it's limited in the number of plants that survive there, then it's also limited in the number of animals, insects, and snakes that can live there. There are certain seeded annuals annual flowers that can live in the desert, and so when it does get rain, the desert blooms, but it's very short-lived because soon the hot sun dries up those annuals. It is possible to irrigate a desert and transform it into productive land. That has been done in Israel, that the desert blooms in Israel. A lot of the farmland in Israel is in desert lands that has been converted to farmland only because it is irrigated. There's another wasteland besides desert, and it is called tundra. Peepaw and I have actually seen the tundra when we were in Colorado, and we went to the top of Pikes Peak, which is the highest mountain in Colorado. And there is, to the human eye, it doesn't appear as if there's anything growing there. There are no trees, and certainly there are no shrubs or grasses. But the whole tundra, the whole land, is covered with a kind of hardy moss. And there are signs all over the place telling people not to walk on the tundra, to preserve the tundra. The tundra grows in permafrost. It is soil that never thaws but remains frozen all year, all year round, and no trees can grow in the permafrost. The animals that live there are hardy ones, as you can imagine, like musk and wolves and hares, which are big rabbits. They're the ones that live permanently in the permafrost or the tundra. There are herds of caribou and reindeer that do migrate there during the summer, but come winter, come cold weather, they go back to where they came from. They do not live in the permafrost or on the tundra year round. Another thing that we have mentioned is a mountain vegetation. It's possible to have all three kinds of major biomes on a single mountain. It's possible to have forests, both coniferous and deciduous forests at the base of a mountain. And then as you get further up the mountain, then the coniferous evergreens are the only trees that really can survive until you get to perhaps the summit of the mountain where even those trees cannot survive, and all we have is tundra. And above that, what do we have? We have rock, because even the tundra doesn't live on the rock. So next week we're going to be talking about, or next lesson I should say, we're going to be talking about industry. We're going to be kind of switching from these natural biomes and climates and situations, and we're going to be looking at the natural resources that God has provided and how they are utilized by people to support themselves and their families and accumulate for trade with other places that have natural resources that they do not have. So we will talk about that next time.